It began, as such things often do in Flaxborough, with a bang that was not so much thunderous as it was inconveniently timed. On the dais erected in the middle of the town square, an awkwardly tilted structure lent by the Amateur Operatic Society, Mayor Hargreaves' lips had just parted to deliver his annual civic assurance speech. The bunting fluttered, the brass band paused in their rendition of Jerusalem, and a woman in the crowd dropped her thermos with a metallic clatter that drew 30 heads. But it wasn't the clatter that caused the silence to lengthen like an uninvited sermon. It was the mayor's mouth, now agape and mute, and his fingers fumbling at the inside pocket of his brocade waistcoat. The speech was gone. What emerged instead was a slip of paper that he examined, frowned at, and then quickly pocketed with the guilty shuffle of a man who's realized he's brought a shopping list to a wedding. With an apologetic cough, Mayor Hargreave turned and exited the platform, leaving the microphone to hiss like an offended house cat. "Oh dear," murmured Mrs. Brindle, who ran the hat shop. "He's taken ill again. You mark my words." "No," insisted the butcher's assistant, overheard slicing liver with righteous fervour. "He's had a tip-off about the allotments. It's political. You'll see. I told my Nora last week that something was off. I saw him talking to the librarian, whispering, and him not even a reader. It's not him. It's that secretary of his, the one with the handbag that looks like it costs more than her car. I reckon it's stage fright. The same thing happened to my Wilf when he won that marrow contest. The square was buzzing like a hornet's nest where someone had attempted to read poetry aloud. People jostled. Sergeant Love nearly choked on a barley sugar when a pushchair nudged his shin. He was already noting which suspicious persons had gathered suspiciously close to the exit. Purbright, meanwhile, stood by the war memorial, his hat set at a thoughtful angle. His eyes, untroubled by the chaos, drifted to the lectern. There, slipped between 2 pages of sheet music left by the band's conductor, was something peculiar. A hymn board number had been propped beside it, 122. There had been no hymns scheduled. The number was oddly pristine. He stepped forward and gently lifted it. "Well, that's not usually part of the civic liturgy," he murmured, mostly to himself. Love arrived beside him with the enthusiasm of a man whose feet hadn't stopped aching since Whitsun. "What do you think, sir? Medical event? Stage nerves? Possibly a ruse to delay the announcement about the new bypass?" Purbright gave the hymn board number a final glance and returned it quietly to where he'd found it. "My dear Love," he said, folding his hands, "there are only 2 reasons a man abandons a microphone mid-sentence. Either he has nothing to say or far too much." A fresh murmur swept the crowd, like a ripple across a duck pond where someone had dropped a bottle of gin. At the far side of the platform, Councilwoman Gwendolen Prowse had begun announcing that the mayor was merely experiencing a moment of reflection. She held aloft a clipboard as though it were a moral shield, but her eyes darted in the way of someone trying to locate the emergency escape hatch in a church organ. Then came the twist. A young lad, scruffy knees, ink on collar, face familiar to most as Tommy Dibble, 3rd best truant in Form 4, darted from the throng. He clambered onto the back of the dais, reached into the mayor's abandoned lectern, and retrieved a small leather folder. He held it up like a holy relic and shouted, "Is this what he forgot?" Several adults gasped in unison. The folder was indeed the mayor's. His initials, CH, were faintly pressed into the worn leather, but inside, as Sergeant Love took it gently from Tommy's hand and opened it, there was nothing resembling a speech. Instead, there was a menu. More precisely, it was the wine list from the Flaxborough Yacht Club's summer luncheon, annotated heavily in pencil with curious symbols, stars, underlines, and 3 little crescents. "Curious sort of oratory preparation," muttered Love. Purbright looked up at the town hall clock. "It's 24 minutes past 3, he said thoughtfully. "Is that significant, sir?" "Possibly," Purbright replied. "Depending on what time Mr. Hargreave realized his words had been spirited away and replaced with a drinks list." "And who'd do that?" asked Love, blinking. Purbright turned, his gaze sweeping over the crowd that was already folding in upon itself like an anxious souffle. Somewhere beyond them, a car door slammed. A woman laughed too brightly. The smell of vinegar chips mingled with late summer roses. "We shall ask," Purbright said, politely. Love started to say something else, but stopped when he noticed the back of the wine list. There, just visible beneath the edge of the folder's flap, was a corner of a torn page. A single sentence had been typed in uneven, faded ink. It read, "This will not be the last silence." Purbright read it. Then, almost imperceptibly, he smiled. The little scrap of typed warning sat between Purbright and Love, like a confessional secret nobody had expected to share before tea. This will not be the last silence. It had been inserted with deliberation, folded just so, and hidden behind a wine list in the mayor's official folder, as though daring someone to discover it and then puzzle over its import during an intermission at the local pantomime. Sergeant Love, who preferred puzzles to be boxed, labelled, and finished with corner pieces first, frowned at the page. "Bit theatrical, that. Sounds like something you'd read out loud in a blackout." Purbright nodded absently. "Or just before one. With the civic assurance ceremony abandoned and the mayor reportedly resting comfortably, the town square had dissolved into scattered conversations and half-hearted wandering. A few attendees were still loitering by the cake stall in case refund tokens were issued. Others, drawn by curiosity, now hovered near the steps of the town hall, craning their necks in hopes of seeing someone in authority stride out and explain everything in one go. They would be disappointed. Instead, Inspector Purbright and Sergeant Love made their way discreetly up the town hall stairs. The reception clerk, a thin woman with the persistent expression of someone bracing for a sneeze that never arrived, offered them a tight smile and nodded toward the mayor's office. "He's not in, gentlemen. Councilwoman Prowse is holding the reins at present." Mr. Hargreave left quite suddenly. Carr, still in the lot, though, took the back corridor, said he needed air. Purbright raised a brow. Did he seem distressed? Hard to say. He always looks a bit like a man who's just remembered he left the oven on. Councilwoman Gwendolen Prowse, perched at the mayor's desk as though it had personally offended her, was rifling through a drawer with the precision of a librarian reorganizing the poetry section. She looked up and exhaled sharply when she saw them. "If you're here to make something of this nonsense, Inspector, you'll have to join the queue. I've already had 2 reporters, 3 councillors, and a man from the Rotary Club who swore he saw a smoke signal from the roof." "Good afternoon, Councilwoman," Purbright said gently. "We're merely trying to clarify the nature of the disruption. Would you mind telling us whether Mr. Hargreave had expressed any concern about today's address?" Prowse leaned back and crossed her arms. He was anxious, yes, kept glancing at his notes as though someone had written them in Morse. But he didn't mention anything to me directly. All I know is that he was supposed to announce the funding allocation for the Heritage Garden, and the waste processing initiative Love piped in. That's the new tip with the recyclable fountains? Yes, she said dryly. The same. And between you and me, it's a political hornet's nest. Several interested parties, land rights, donations, and future mayoral endorsements. You know the sort of thing. But if someone intended to sabotage his speech, I can't imagine why they'd replace it with a luncheon menu. Unless they were trying to divert, not destroy, Purbright said, looking out the window. What do you mean? A substitution draws attention without causing real damage. The mayor's authority remains intact. The content of his speech, however, is redirected. Prowse tilted her head. To what end? That's what we hope to discover, said Purbright. They thanked her and departed, passing once more through the reception, where the clerk now appeared, be locked in silent debate with a small brass bell. Outside, the late afternoon light had begun to take on the golden hue of low sun on limestone, and the town seemed oddly quiet after the earlier hubbub. As they descended the steps, Love tugged at his collar. Sir, the wine list. Should we treat it as a red herring? No, Purbright replied. I suspect it's more of a guide. Someone wanted that folder opened. Someone knew it would be. The wine list is a placeholder, a bookmark in the mayor's silence. Love gave a small grunt of resignation. Then we ought to start with whoever had access to his office. Purbright paused. Quite right. And we'll begin with Miss Travis. Miss Travis, the mayor's secretary, drives the car that costs less than her handbag. They found Miss Travis at her desk behind the pane-glassed partition on the second floor. She was, at that moment, furiously typing a memo to the custodial staff concerning the unexplained removal of a small brass spittoon from the council chamber, a matter she referred to as aesthetic vandalism. When gently interrupted, she folded her hands and said, I did indeed prepare the speech, yes, typed and triple-checked, as always. I left it in the mayor's folder first thing this morning. He popped in around 10 and took it with him. Asked for a copy of the club luncheon menu as well. Said he might need it for reference. Purbright cocked his head. Do you know if he received the right menu? I handed him the June version. That's the one with the guest speaker's toast on the back. That's not the version we found, said Love. No toast, just scribbles. Miss Travis frowned. Well, I only had the one copy. Who else entered the office this morning? Purbright asked. She considered. Only Councillor Larch. He came to drop off some planning documents. Was he left alone? Well, yes. For a minute or two. I went to chase down the mayor's teacup. He's always misplacing it. As they left her office, Love muttered, That's something, isn't it? Councillor Larch, access to the folder and motive, perhaps, if he's involved in that Heritage Garden business. Quite. But we won't confront him yet, Purbright said. There's still the matter of the typed message. And more urgently, we must speak to the band. Love blinked. The brass band? Yes, Purbright said calmly. Because, if I'm not mistaken, the hymn board number that appeared beside the lectern wasn't just an ornament. And I have a notion they may know exactly who left it. The bandstand, still bearing the faint dents of civic dignity and trombone cases, was mostly deserted by the time Purbright and Love returned to it. Only two figures remained, Mr. Worsley, conductor emeritus, and wearer of a waistcoat festooned with enamelled pins from musical contests dating back to 1963, and a young euphonium player named Nora Kemp, who was engaged in the careful cleaning of her mouthpiece with a tissue so floral it resembled a prop from a tea dance. Mr. Worsley greeted them with the kind of expression that suggested he had just finished putting the world back in key and was now rather loath to have it questioned. "Afternoon, gentlemen. If this is about the regrettable acoustics during the third verse of Jerusalem, I'll have you know the microphone placement was not my doing." Purbright smiled faintly. "We're more interested in the hymn board, Mr. Worsley. Number 122. It appeared beside the lectern. Do you recall who placed it there?" Worsley blinked, then tugged at his lapels. "Hymn board. That wasn't part of our arrangement. We had no plans for hymns. This was meant to be a secular occasion. If you'll pardon the word Nora, without looking up, mumbled, 'I saw it. That board. A boy brought it, said it was from the vicar. But the vicar wasn't even there.'" Purbright's eyebrows lifted. What did this boy look like? Tallish, in a jumper too warm for the weather. Bit of a squint. Might have been one of those larch cousins Love scratched behind his ear. "Another larch. That's a whole thicket." Purbright turned to Mr. Worsley. "Would anyone have access to your staging area this morning?" Before the performance, the conductor folded his arms. "We arrived at 1 o'clock sharp, left our equipment under the tarpaulin before lunch. Anyone could have wandered in, I suppose. But we keep it tidy. If someone placed something among our things, they did it discreetly." Was anything missing? Nora suddenly stopped polishing. One of the folders had been moved, the third cornet's sheet music. Gerald complained that it smelled faintly of vinegar when he picked it up. "An olfactory detail," murmured Purbright, "is not to be underestimated." They thanked the band and strolled away, down the gravelled path toward the duck pond where the last crumbs of sponge cake floated, chased by a duck of alarming purpose. Love, scribbling something in his notebook, glanced sideways. "Sir, what would hymn 122 be if it were in a book?" "Let all mortal flesh keep silence," said Purbright. "It's a curious choice for a civic address. Unless, of course, one wished to suggest that silence was preferable to speech or a warning," said Love. "Another silence to come, like the note said." Purbright gave a thoughtful nod. A layered message, then, planted visibly but subtly, a kind of public whisper. Their path took them past the churchyard and on to Larch Lane, a pleasant cul-de-sac of stone facades and self-righteous hedges. The Larch family, prominent in Flaxborough since the time of powdered wigs and improper baptisms, occupied 3 of the 6 houses on the lane. Councillor Graham Larch resided at number 4, a primly symmetrical dwelling with a lion-shaped door-knocker that looked permanently offended. They found him pruning something that had already given up on blooming for the season. He straightened when he saw them, shears in hand like a reluctant soldier. "Inspector, Sergeant, I presume this isn't a social call, merely gathering context," said Purbright mildly. "We understand you were in the mayor's office this morning." Larch wiped his hands on a gardening apron that bore the crest of the Flaxborough Rotary. "I dropped off a folder. The latest zoning recommendations. Nothing dramatic." "Were you alone?" "Briefly. Miss Travis had stepped out. I left the papers on her desk. That's all. Did you handle the mayor's folder?" Larch narrowed his eyes. "Not unless the folder in question was under the zoning documents. I may have moved it aside, yes." but I certainly didn't read anything. Is something amiss?" Purbright gave a small smile. The speech went missing. In its place, a wine list and a curious note. Larch laughed, but it was tight. "Sounds like the kind of prank Bert Templeton would pull. He's got too much time and a cellar full of mischief." "Would any of your nephews have attended the event this afternoon?" Love asked. "One wearing a jumper?" Larch's expression shifted, just slightly. "Young Elliot was about, I believe. His mother dragged him to see the mayor. She hoped it would instill some civic spirit. Doubt it worked." "Would you mind if we spoke to him?" "I do, somewhat," Larch replied, folding his arms. "He's a sensitive boy. Prone to storytelling, Purbright met his gaze evenly. So are most witnesses. If the truth emerges in fragments, it's our job to piece them together." After a moment, Larch sighed and nodded toward the side door. "He's in the conservatory, drawing space rockets. Try not to launch anything." Elliot Larch was 9 years old, mildly freckled, and had a nose that looked permanently caught between sniff and sneeze. He looked up from his sketchpad with the expression of someone prepared to be told off in new and exciting ways. "Did you take anything to the bandstand today, Elliot?" Purbright asked gently. Elliot squirmed. "It wasn't stealing. Uncle said I could help. Said I should give them the number." "What number?" "The hymn board. He gave it to me wrapped in a tea towel. Said it was a joke, to lighten things up." Purbright crouched. "Did he say why hymn 122? Elliot frowned. "Said it was the one about keeping quiet. Then he winked and told me not to tell Aunt May." Purbright rose slowly. Outside the conservatory, a blackbird landed on the railing and tilted its head as if eavesdropping. Love cleared his throat. "Sir, that's confirmation, isn't it?" "Of the mechanism, yes," said Purbright, "but not the message or the motive." They stepped back onto the garden path. The light had dipped again, and clouds gathered like murmurs above the rooftops. A key? Wind carried a faint scent of wood smoke and something sharper. Printer's ink, perhaps, or the anticipation of a letter not yet delivered. Behind them, a bell rang from the Larch house. Purbright turned. "And there's our next thread." The bell's chime from the Larch house was not grand or ceremonial. It was the crisp, impatient sound of a kitchen timer long overdue. Councillor Larch appeared on the garden path behind them, handkerchief in one hand and a folded note in the other. "This was just delivered by hand," he said tersely. "No postmark, no envelope. A lad on a bicycle handed it to our cleaner and rode off before she could get his name. Thought you might want a look." Purbright took the note carefully. The paper was the same aged ivory as the one found in the mayor's folder, with the same erratic typewriter font. This message was only 2 lines long. The silence is deliberate. Watch what fills it. He held it at an angle to the light, noting the smudge at the corner. Grease, faintly yellowed, perhaps from fingers recently handling food or oil. "May I borrow this, councillor?" he asked. Larch nodded, but didn't look pleased. "I'd rather this not become a circus. We've enough division on the council as it is." "You'll be the first to know if it turns into one," said Purbright with a thin smile. "We'll try to ensure you don't get the role of clown." They left Larch Lane behind, making their way back toward the town centre by way of Lintry Street. Shop shutters were beginning to come down, and the scent of baked goods still lingered faintly from the co-op's afternoon clearance. Love walked beside him, glancing now and then at the folded note. "This feels like a campaign, sir. One of those what do you call it, sabotage through suggestion jobs, undermine the mayor not with facts, but with symbols. Quite, murmured Purbright. We're not being told the truth. We're being asked to deduce it from the negative space. Same with that note in the folder then. Yes, each message invites interpretation without anchoring it. Clever. It forces the town to fill in the blanks with whatever fears or assumptions they already carry. Love grimaced. And we're walking straight into the next big gathering, aren't we? They arrived at the Methodist Hall just as the first guests were trickling in for the Flaxborough Historical Society's Autumn Lecture, a popular fixture for those who enjoyed long slideshows about Roman drainage or Napoleonic doilies. Tonight's subject was parchment, piety and powder, ecclesiastical cosmetics through the ages, delivered by the redoubtable Miss Eudora Panks. Purbright had no particular interest in the history of clergy rouge, but the event offered a perfect storm of witnesses, suspects, and if the trend continued, a fresh embarrassment. Inside, the hall was already half filled. Rows of wooden chairs bore the polite discomfort of long use, and the tea-urn steamed dutifully at the back beside a tray of custard creams. Purbright's eyes swept the room as they entered. There was Bert Templeton, chuckling too loudly near the biscuit table. Mrs. Brindle, hat askew, whispering furiously to the head librarian. Councillor Larch's sister, Miriam, sat stiffly near the front with a notebook open and a pen poised like a spear. Then there was Councilwoman Prowse, seated conspicuously alone at the rear, a programme folded into precise quarters in her lap. She caught sight of them and waved them over with the kind of smile that barely moved the lips. I expect you're here, in case Miss Panks's slides are more than the town can bear. Purely observational, said Purbright, though we remain open to incident. Prowse leaned in slightly. I had a phone call just now. Anonymous. A voice told me to mind the board tonight. Then they hung up. What board? No idea. I assumed a trick, but you see why I mentioned it. Purbright turned toward the stage, where a freestanding display board had been erected beside the screen, draped with a dust sheet. Love followed his gaze. Think it's the same one? Let's find out. Miss Panks was being introduced by the chairman of the Historical Society, a man with the name and posture of someone called Reginald. As the clapping began, she pulled the cloth from the board. It was not her opening slide. Instead, fixed to the board in 4 brass corners, was a copy of the mayor's speech, or what claimed to be. The document was headlined Annual Civic Assurance Address, but the text beneath was not what any official version should contain. It was a list of names, names followed by figures, monetary sums, dates, annotations. Purbright moved forward, ignoring the rustle of alarmed whispers. He scanned the first 3 lines. Harold Monkton, £4,200. Soil and Rubble Disposal, 2019. Prowse G, £1,150. Community Refreshments. Templeton, B, £3,600. Sundries, March 2020. It continued, a ledger masquerading as a speech. Quietly, he removed it from the board and turned to the room. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice even, this document appears to have been misfiled. We'll resume the lecture shortly. There were gasps. Half the room stood, half remained frozen. Miss Panks simply blinked and retrieved her notes. Love leaned in. Someone wants a reckoning. That's not a prank. It's a warning shot. Purbright nodded once. And now we know what's filling the silence. By morning, the list had acquired a name of its own: the shame sheet. It began appearing in whispered conversations, in sidelong glances passed over the fruit stalls, and most of all, in a rumour that a copy had been tacked to the notice board outside the train station before dawn and torn down within minutes. Who had posted it, no one could say, though half the town was quite certain it must have been the same lad on a bicycle who delivered the earlier typed message. Inspector Purbright sat quietly at his desk in the police station, the alleged speech folded before him like an accusation in an unspoken courtroom. He had already compared it with the notes from Miss Travis's office. The typography matched neither her machine nor her formatting. The original speech, its whereabouts still unknown, was presumably either destroyed or still in someone's careful custody. But this one, a facsimile crafted to humiliate, had been prepared well in advance. He read the entries again. There were 13 in total. Some names were familiar in the usual civic way: Mrs. Prowse, Bert Templeton, Mr. Monkton, the roadworks contractor. But others were less so: a small-time greengrocer, the assistant at the library, even the vicar's nephew. Each entry contained a name, an amount, a date, and a purpose. All plausible, all innocuous if viewed through the right lens. Except that lens had now been publicly shattered. Sergeant Love entered, holding a canvas parcel like it might contain eggs or explosives. "Found this in the town hall suggestion box, sir." No note. Wrapped in oilskin and tied with string, Purbright opened it carefully. Inside lay a stained handkerchief, a woman's, lace-edged and monogrammed, and a single paperclip holding 2 items: a council meeting agenda from 3 years prior and a betting slip from the Flaxborough races marked with a crude star beside the name Craven's Folly, 11-2. Love squinted. "That's not one of the horses from this year." "No," said Purbright. "That meeting was chaired by Councillor Monkton. The agenda shows an approved grant for sports facilities, later redirected. This," he tapped the betting slip, "suggests a private use of public money." "Or at least the accusation of one," Love muttered. Purbright tucked the items back inside. "The pattern is sharpening. Every new piece isn't just data, it's ammunition. Someone's constructing a case by installment. Each item is just incriminating enough to feel like a whisper from someone who knows more." He stood and retrieved the wine list from the mayor's folder, still bearing its symbols and pencil marks. Holding it beside the shame sheet, he noticed the patterns at once. The asterisks aligned with names from the list. One name, Prowse, had 3 crescent moons beside it: Bert Templeton, a square, and 2 underlines. "A code," Purbright said softly. "Or at least a tally." "You think this was all planned before the mayor's speech?" asked Love. "No," replied Purbright. "I think it was the mayor's speech." Love blinked. "You mean he was going to expose them? Or at least suggest he might?" The silence that followed was interrupted by a sharp knock. P.C. Willoughby poked his head in, breathless. "Sir, you'd better come. There's been a disturbance at the newspaper office. Windows smashed, editor shouting something about stolen ink and malicious typesetting." They followed him across the square to the Flaxborough Courier, where the editor, a florid man with a moustache like a Victorian judge, was pacing behind his desk. The office smelled of linseed oil, scorched paper, and alarm. "They got in sometime after midnight," he said, pointing to the shattered window. "But nothing was taken, at least not what you'd expect. Type blocks rearranged. Half my early run printed the mayor's face with the words, "Truth is a fine wine," beneath it. "Is that a phrase you've used before?" asked Purbright. The editor bristled. "Not unless you count my review of the Cheese and Wine fundraiser in '92. Who else has access to your press? Only the apprentice. And he's off sick with the flu. Besides, this wasn't done by someone looking to vandalize. It's too deliberate. Whoever did it knew how to operate the press." Purbright turned to the smashed window. A single black feather lay on the ledge, caught in a splinter. Love raised an eyebrow. "Message? Possibly. Or an accident," Purbright replied. "But either way, our silent correspondent is growing bolder. First a vanished speech, then a coded wine list, then a public airing of accounts. And now, media manipulation." They left the Courier and paused in the shadow of the town hall. A group of councillors was gathered outside, speaking in hushed tones. The mayor was not among them. Love tilted his head. Could Hargreave be hiding? Or running? "Neither," said Purbright. "I believe he's waiting." "For what?" Purbright's eyes drifted toward the church tower. For the next silence to speak louder than the last. Just then, a boy on a bicycle whizzed past them, scattering pigeons and clattering over a loose cobblestone. A folded sheet fluttered from his bag and landed at Purbright's feet. He picked it up. Typed in the same font, the new note read, "One more truth, then the reckoning." The note in Purbright's hand trembled slightly in the rising breeze, its message stark and unambiguous. One more truth, then the reckoning. No signature, no salutation, only the promise, or threat, of something final. Sergeant Love peered over his shoulder at the paper, as if expecting it to begin speaking on its own. "Reckoning," he said aloud, testing the word. "That's more than gossip. That's biblical." Purbright gave a small nod. "Or theatrical. The staging so far has certainly favoured drama. The bicycle rider had long vanished down Market Lane, a silhouette swallowed by the steady rhythm of shopkeepers dragging in sandwich boards and sweeping up their patches of cobblestone. The town had acquired a wariness now, like a cat watching a roomful of rocking chairs. Back at the station, they laid out all the items once more. The wine list, the shame sheet, the typed notes, the betting slip, the annotated council agenda. Purbright stood before the display like a man attempting to decipher a foreign play with only the props and no script. "Let's assume," he began, "that the mayor intended to deliver a speech exposing misuse of funds. Something dissuaded him. Perhaps pressure, perhaps fear. But someone else knew, or suspected, and began leaking pieces of it." "But why not leak the whole thing at once?" Love asked. "Why the drip feed?" "Because the whole truth can be dismissed," said Purbright. "It can be denied or laughed off. But bits and pieces, they grow in the retelling. They create tension, momentum. They become inevitable." He stepped back and pointed to the wine list. This wasn't a decoy. It was a key. Whoever made these marks intended them to be found and interpreted. A knock at the door interrupted the thought. P.C. Willoughby entered, his expression unusually grim. "Sir, you're going to want to see this. There's been an incident at the cricket pavilion. Something left behind." The pavilion stood at the far edge of town, a modest structure with whitewashed walls and a corrugated roof, still bearing faint banners from last month's summer fete. As they approached, Purbright saw the constable's instinct had been right. Something was off. On the front doors, large sheets of butcher's paper had been tacked in an uneven row. Each bore a single word, painted in black with a wide, clumsy brush. What does a town deserve when its truth is dismissed? Below the last sheet, taped to the door handle, was another typewritten message. One of them knows. One of them lied. One of them paid for silence. Tonight, their voice will return. Listen well. Love looked up at the message, his jaw set. That sounds like a threat. Purbright didn't respond immediately. Instead, he examined the paint, running a finger across a corner. It came away dry, but faintly tacky at the edges. Recent. No signature again, Love added. No, but the staging is unmistakable, said Purbright. Another set piece, designed to provoke, not clarify. But who's the voice? What returns? Possibly the mayor, or someone who shares his secrets. They walked back toward the station, dusk pressing gently over the town. The lamps had begun to flicker on, and the last shops were locking up. Purbright noticed a group of youths huddled near the post office, not misbehaving, but unusually silent, as if waiting for something to begin. Inside, Miss French from the library was already waiting at the front desk, her handbag clutched like a moral argument. She looked up, wide-eyed. "Inspector, I've just had the most unnerving encounter." A man came to the reference desk and asked for council budgets. Old ones, dating back 5 years. Nothing unusual in that, of course, but then he asked whether I had any records of typed messages in the local paper. Did he say who he was? No name. Mid-40s, beard. Wore one of those jackets with too many pockets. I asked if he was writing a book. He said, no, just unearthing the one already written. Did he leave anything? She opened her handbag and drew out a slip of paper. Another message, typed, folded in thirds. Truth is not missing. It is misfiled. Purbright read it twice. He's giving us instructions now. Miss French hesitated, then added. He also said, if the town can't find the truth, I'll show it where to look. That sounds like a promise, Love muttered. Or a threat. Purbright placed the new slip with the others. The pieces were aligning, albeit in a strange geometry. The mayor's silence wasn't panic, he said at last. It was deliberate. He knew the list was coming. He knew the notes. He may not have written them, but he expected them. So who is our ghost author? That, said Purbright, is the question we must answer before tonight ends. Before the reckoning arrives, he moved to the window, staring out toward the gathering dark. The church bell told the hour, 6 o'clock, and somewhere in the town, someone was preparing their next silence. The night arrived not with drama, but with an almost unnerving gentleness. Low wind in the eaves, the dull tap of leaves against windows, and the hush of a town collectively holding its breath. In the police station, a hush had settled too. The stack of clues on Purbright's desk had grown no thicker, but their weight had shifted, their angles suggesting something near completion. And still, the mayor remained absent from the public eye. Love stirred his tea for the 5th time without drinking it. Sir, this reckoning, whatever it is, it's due tonight. That's what the note said. And if I may say so, we don't appear any closer to preventing it. Perhaps not, Purbright replied, but we may still witness it wisely. They didn't have to wait long. At precisely 7:15, the station received a phone call, not from the usual list of agitated citizens or disoriented pet owners, but from the switchboard operator at the town's telephone exchange. She was out of breath and clearly rattled. There's something going out over the phone lines, she said. On the public broadcast system, used to be for wartime announcements. No one's touched that equipment in years. But it's live now. Voices, a recording. I recognized one of them. Whose? The mayor. The old public announcement system was a relic, built into the town's infrastructure during the war and later adapted for emergency alerts. In the last 30 years, it had been used once for a mistaken report of a gas leak and then forgotten. Its speakers were hidden in lampposts and rooftops, dormant birds in rusted cages. But as Purbright and Love stepped outside, the air itself changed. A quiet crackle. Then the unmistakable, faintly nasal voice of Mayor Clement Hargreave. "If you are hearing this," it began, "then I have failed to deliver my speech, or chosen not to. The difference, I'm afraid, will be yours to decide." People were emerging from houses now, drawn to the oddity of the sound. Lights flicked on, curtains twitched. The voice continued, rising and falling as it echoed from the speakers above the post office and the square. "You have trusted me, many of you, far beyond what I deserved. Others have not, and you were right to be cautious. For a long time, I remained silent about things I knew, things I suspected. I thought the truth could wait. I was wrong." There was a pause, not silence exactly, but a kind of breath in the recording, as if the mayor had looked out over the town he both led and feared. "I will not accuse anyone directly. That's not my place. But I will say this. The shame sheet, as some are now calling it, is real. The numbers, the names, those were gathered not for vengeance, but for clarity. Some of them were my doing, others were not. And yes, I allowed them to pass unchecked." Love exhaled. "He's confessing." But Purbright shook his head slowly. "No, he's handing over the burden." The voice continued. "Someone else has taken it upon themselves to finish what I could not begin. They've made their own message, their own theatre, and perhaps they are braver than I, or simply more reckless. Either way, you deserve to know. Not all your counsellors are what they seem." A soft gasp rippled through the square. Love turned and saw dozens of people now gathered in small clusters, their faces turned skyward like listeners at an invisible sermon. The mayor's voice grew fainter now, not through volume, but through weariness. "I am not gone. But I may not be mayor for much longer. That, too, is as it should be. Flaxborough deserves transparency, even if it arrives wrapped in scandal. Let what happens next be guided by scrutiny, not spectacle." A final pause. "And remember, silence is never empty. It's just waiting for someone to ask the right question." Then the line clicked off. The town stood still. It was not the silence of confusion, nor the stunned quiet that follows disaster. It was something deeper, a collective realization that the story had shifted, that whatever petty complaints had governed the week before, bin collection, flower show judges, broken paving slabs, were now eclipsed by something larger and more uncomfortable. Back at the station, P.C. Willoughby rushed in, waving a fresh envelope. "Just dropped in the station door, sir." Typed again. "No return address." Purbright opened it. 2 truths have passed. 1 remains. But who dares to speak it aloud? And with it, a small object, a lapel pin bearing the Flaxborough Council crest. The enamel was chipped, the back was bent, as if it had been torn from a coat in haste. Love stared. "That's the mayor's. I've seen him wear it every ceremony since Easter." Purbright nodded. "Then the stage is nearly set. And the final truth." Purbright placed the pin beside the wine list, the shame sheet, the betting slip. "We'll find it. Or it will find us." The moon hung above Flaxborough like a careful listener, pale and still, watching over a town tiptoeing through the aftermath of confession. After the mayor's unexpected broadcast, the streets had not erupted with anger or debate, as one might have expected. Instead, Flaxborough had retreated into itself, drawing curtains, lowering voices, and returning to the peculiar calm that always followed the town's more memorable spectacles. At the police station, however, the quiet was laced with purpose. Purbright sat once more before the table of curated evidence, his theatre of shadows, examining each object as if it might, under the right light, confess. The lapel pin lay closest to him now, its bent clasp still bearing the faint scent of pipe smoke. Love, leaning with arms folded, glanced between it and the last message. 3 truths, he said. 1 left, and still no culprit. No fingerprints, no signature, not even a misplaced smudge of ink. The author doesn't want to be caught, Purbright murmured. Not yet. The game's not finished. Do we think the mayor's complicit, Love asked, or just caught up in it? Neither. I think he's a reluctant actor in a production someone else began. Purbright reached for the wine list again, tracing the penciled crescents beside the names. Something about the shapes, their frequency and positioning, tugged at his memory, like a name almost recalled. What if the wine list wasn't coded in numbers or categories, he said slowly, but in timings? Love blinked. Timings? Look at the spacing. The first asterisk is next to Moncton, the next 2 to Prowse, then Templeton. 3 symbols, then 2, then 1. Could it be a countdown? To what? Before Purbright could answer, P.C. Willoughby reappeared at the door. His expression carried a tightness that immediately erased any trace of theory from the room. Sir, he said, there's been a break-in. At the Heritage Garden Pavilion, Purbright and Love were out of the station within minutes. The Heritage Garden was the town's pride, or so the brochures claimed. It had been the subject of much political back and forth over funding, its flower beds landscaped to depict various historical scenes, most notably the Siege of Newark, rendered entirely in pansies and ornamental grasses. The pavilion, a modest wooden structure built to house ceremonial trowels and keep local dignitaries dry during speeches, now stood ajar. The side window had been forced cleanly, a single pane lifted and set aside like a page in a careful book. Inside, the scene was both peculiar and deliberate. On the centre table, once reserved for grant forms and commemorative spades, sat a leather-bound diary. It was open, and its pages bore familiar typewritten font. Purbright stepped closer, brow furrowed. This wasn't a note. It was a transcript. The header read, Private Meeting, Flaxborough Council, Confidential Minutes, not for public release. The conversation it recorded was damning in tone, if not in direct wording. Templeton. It's too risky. If the numbers get out, Prowse. Then bury them deeper. Use youth grants as a wash line. Hargreave. There's only so much I can redirect before someone notices. If anyone asks, we call it discretionary spend. And then, Moncton. If we're caught, I'm not covering anyone's mess but my own. The date marked was nearly 2 years ago. Love let out a low whistle. That's not a truth, sir. That's a confession. Purbright closed the book slowly. And now we understand why the mayor hesitated. He was part of this, yes, but on the edge of it. Enough to feel guilty, but not bold enough to expose it alone. Love knelt and picked up something from the floor, a typed label. It had been deliberately placed beside the table leg. Truth 3. They all agreed. Only one regrets it. Purbright's voice was quiet. And our orchestrator wants us to find out who. The implications were clear. The first truth had been the missing speech. The second, the public airing via the shame sheet. And now, the third, a private moment, preserved and delivered to implicate all involved. What now, sir? Love asked. Do we arrest them? On what charge? A typed transcript left anonymously in an unlocked building. It's not proof, yet. So what do we do? Purbright looked up at the ceiling of the pavilion, where a single bulb hung unlit. He closed his eyes, calculating. We invite them to speak, one by one, politely, in public, where silence carries weight. You mean, I mean tomorrow, at the council chamber. We'll call an emergency session. They won't know who we suspect, or what we have. But one of them will give themselves away. And the orchestrator. Purbright turned to the open window. They'll be watching, listening. And if we miss the truth, they may decide to act again. Love hesitated. You think it'll stop? Purbright's reply was almost inaudible. That depends on whether anyone finally speaks before another silence is forced. By midday the following morning, the town hall had the twitchy atmosphere of a theatre awaiting the first cue. Word of the emergency council session had spread quickly. Too quickly, in fact. Although it was not officially open to the public, at least 24 townspeople had found legitimate reasons to linger near the building, delivering invoices, renewing dog licenses, measuring flower baskets. Even the postman made his rounds suspiciously slowly. Inside, the council chamber had been hastily rearranged. The long oak table remained, but extra chairs had been brought in for observers, a court term which now included 2 local journalists, the town librarian, a representative from the Rotary Club, and a woman who insisted she was with the Heritage Garden Soil Monitoring Committee, though no such committee had previously existed. Purbright took his place quietly in the back, not as a participant but as a witness. He had arranged the meeting through Miss Travis, who had in turn convinced enough councillors to attend under the vague premise of clarifying recent misunderstandings. They arrived one by one, each carrying a particular posture of self-preservation. Councilwoman Prowse looked tight-lipped but confident, her hair lacquered into its usual impervious shell. Bert Templeton brought with him a briefcase far too large for its likely contents, which he set down with performative care. Monkton walked in last, sleeves rolled up, as if he'd just come from repaving the high street himself. Mayor Hargreave was already seated at the head, not speaking. His complexion had regained colour, but his eyes darted more than usual. His lapel bore no pin. The session opened with procedural murmurings, then a vague preamble from Miss Travis about restoring civic trust, which was met with several coughs and the shifting of chair legs on polished wood. It was when the mayor finally rose that the temperature in the room shifted. I believe, he began, that Flaxborough deserves clarity, not showmanship. There have been misunderstandings, suspicions, but it's time we address them properly, through records and accountability. I want to begin by reviewing all council discretionary spending over the last 36 months, publicly. That caused a reaction, not outrage, but a ripple of discomfort. A paper rustled. Bert Templeton adjusted his tie 3 times in 5 seconds. Monkton frowned. Are you suggesting impropriety, Mayor? I'm suggesting the appearance of impropriety, Councillor, and I'd like to remove it, if possible. Prowse leaned forward. This isn't how we conduct reviews. We use audit panels and finance officers, not public readings. Nevertheless, the mayor said, I've requested Inspector Purbright to be present, in case there are further questions or contributions. At this, all eyes turned to the inspector, who gave a mild nod and remained seated. Love stood behind him, arms folded. Neither wore their usual expressions. Both were watching. What followed was not a confession, but a slow erosion of pretense. The mayor began reading selected entries from recent expenditures, line items that, when listed aloud, took on a strange significance. Councillor, outreach refreshments, legacy heritage consultation, temporary garden lighting, all innocent enough until repeated under fluorescent lights and the scrutiny of one's peers. At the fourth item, Templeton stood. This is political theatre. You're embarrassing good people who've done nothing wrong. Purbright raised a hand calmly. Mr. Templeton, if you'd prefer we discuss the transcript found at the pavilion instead. Templeton froze. What transcript? Oh dear, said Prowse, not hiding her disdain. So that's what this is. You've decided to drag out that fabrication? It's not a fabrication, Monckton said quietly. All eyes turned to him. What do you mean? Prowse demanded. Monckton hesitated, then exhaled. I remember the meeting. I didn't think it was recorded. I didn't know the mayor kept notes. But I remember saying those things. So did you. There was a silence sharp enough to hear the groan of the radiator in the far corner. The mayor looked down. I didn't write it. But I didn't stop it either. Someone else preserved it, someone in that room, or someone with access to what we discarded. Prowse stood. This is absurd. You're allowing gossip to dictate policy. It's slander. No, said a voice from the gallery. It came from Miss French, the librarian. All heads turned. I received a letter this morning, she said, standing now, voice steady. Typed, like the others. It contained a list of books. All of them were borrowed by someone using a false name, A. Maskell. And all of them concerned audio transcription, covert recording, microphones hidden in lapels. She reached into her handbag and pulled out the letter. It ended with this line. The truth was spoken by all. Only one regrets it. But only one recorded it. Purbright stepped forward. We believe someone in this room, or close to it, made a recording of that meeting. Not to destroy reputations, but to ensure the record couldn't vanish. Templeton muttered something inaudible and sat down. Mayor Hargreave looked around the table. If the council has nothing to hide, it will support the inquiry. If it does, then now is the moment to reconsider your chair. A long pause. Prowse's hands, folded neatly before her, twitched once. Then she said, Fine, but let the record show that I do this under protest. That, Purbright said gently, may be the most honest line of the day. From the gallery, someone laughed. Another coughed. The meeting resumed, but the tone had changed. Not redemption, not justice, but something closer to surrender. And outside, unnoticed, someone on a bicycle leaned against the churchyard wall, watching with quiet satisfaction. The emergency council session dispersed with the dignity of a theatre curtain caught halfway by a sudden breeze. Some members marched out stiff-backed and indignant. Others drifted away with the quiet slump of people unsure if they'd just survived a scandal or been swallowed by it. The mayor was the last to leave, pausing briefly at Purbright's side to murmur, You've done what I couldn't, Inspector. I just hope the town's appetite for truth survives the taste. Purbright did not reply. He merely nodded. watching as the man's shoes tapped their retreat down the echoing corridor. Outside, the sky had dimmed to the bruised mauve of late afternoon, and the air had taken on that particular dampness that suggested a drizzle would begin the moment someone dared hang washing. Purbright and Love walked the length of the high street in near silence, passing shuttered shops and wary glances from behind net curtains. Flaxborough was simmering, not in outrage or panic, but in something far more enduring: embarrassment. At the station, a new envelope awaited them, delivered anonymously. It was thinner this time, containing only a single phrase typed neatly on council stationery. The final truth is not a fact. It is a choice. Love stared at it. And what in God's name is that supposed to mean? Purbright didn't answer immediately. He sat down, steepling his fingers beneath his chin, and read the sentence again and again. The words weren't accusatory or even revealing. They felt like a dare or a resignation. "We've been looking for confessions," he said finally. "Names, events, timelines. But whoever's behind this wasn't just trying to unmask corruption. They wanted to test something deeper. The will of the town to confront it." Love paced. "Well, it passed, didn't it? Or stumbled through, at least. Did it?" Purbright tilted his head. "Prowse is still on the council. Templeton has already told the paper he's a victim of political vendettas. And the mayor, though shaken, remains in office. No one has resigned. No apology has been issued. The truth has surfaced, yes, but nothing has been done with it." Love ran a hand through his hair. "You think the orchestrator is planning something else?" "I think they're waiting to see if they have to." That evening, the council chamber was repurposed for a town-sponsored poetry reading, an event scheduled long before any of the recent uproar, and one too far along in the funding calendar to cancel without creating fresh drama. Purbright had no interest in verse, but he went anyway, seating himself in the back row as an act of quiet observation. The crowd was light, mostly retirees, a handful of students, and an older man in a Macintosh who spent more time eyeing the doors than the podium. The poems were earnest and largely unmemorable, but it was during the intermission, when tea was being poured with determined clatter, that something curious occurred. A young woman approached the podium, unnoticed at first. She adjusted the microphone, cleared her throat, and began to read. "Let all mortal flesh keep silence," she said. An old hymn, and yet, recently, a message people turned. The poem was not on the program. She continued, voice steady. "There have been whispers, yes. Notes passed like breadcrumbs. But what does a town do with truth when it finally arrives? Do we welcome it, or do we pretend it was never needed?" Several councillors present began murmuring. The young woman ignored them. "3 truths have been given, one by omission, one by exposure, one by memory. But the final one, the one that matters most, is what happens next." Purbright sat very still. "I am not your mayor. I am not your clerk or your inspector. I am only the one who listened and wrote, because silence is not the absence of sound. It is the refusal to speak." And then she stepped down and walked out before anyone could stop her. The room sat frozen. Then someone coughed. A spoon clinked. Life resumed in the way it always does when a message goes deeper than expected. Love met Purbright outside. Who was she? "Unlisted in the program," said Purbright. "Not a poet, not a known witness, but perhaps the orchestrator. She just admitted it, didn't she?" that she wrote the messages, or that she relayed them. They stood together in the failing light, watching as the last of the guests shuffled away. "Well," said Love, "she certainly didn't seem interested in fame." "No," said Purbright, "because it was never about recognition. It was about forcing the town to hear what it tried not to know. She wrote the record that history might have buried, and now." "Now," said Purbright, "we see whether Flaxborough forgets or changes." Love was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You never asked who the fourth truth was about." Purbright turned to him, eyes glinting. "I didn't need to." The following morning arrived with a diffident sun, casting long, reluctant shadows across the cobbles of Flaxborough, as if unsure whether to illuminate what the town might prefer, remain half-lit. The events of the previous night, quiet, pointed, unforgettable, lingered like smoke in a closed room. No arrests had been made, no resignations tendered, and yet everyone behaved as if some verdict had been delivered, privately, within each household. At the station, the pile of clues remained undisturbed. No new envelopes had arrived. The bicycle boy had not been seen again. And yet Purbright sensed the case was not unfinished, merely settled in a form beyond the usual endings. Love arrived carrying the morning edition of the Flaxborough Courier. The headline, in stark block capitals, read, "Council Shadows Exposed. Who owns the truth?" Below, it was a smaller subheading, "Mayor's Speech that never was reignites public scrutiny." The accompanying article was as carefully balanced as any council-backed bench. 3 paragraphs of summary, 2 of cautious accusation, and 1 of guarded optimism. The editor, it seemed, had learned a new tone overnight, regretful yet loyal, curious but respectful of authority. It was the kind of article meant to ruffle no more feathers than strictly necessary. Purbright set it aside. "What do you make of it, sir?" Love asked. "Did we do enough?" The inspector considered this a long moment. "We revealed what was hidden, without dragging it into spectacle. That is, perhaps, all we can ever hope for in such matters, but no one's stepping down." "No," said Purbright, "but they are looking over their shoulders. That will have to suffice." For now there was a knock at the door. Miss Travis entered, her usual calm clipped just slightly at the edges. "I've come on behalf of the mayor," she said. "He's asked not to be disturbed for the remainder of the week. He intends to release a written statement by Monday, but he asked me to give you this in person." She handed over a sealed envelope, heavy, cream-colored, bearing the town crest. Purbright opened it. Inside was a single sheet, handwritten. "Inspector, you were right. It was never about exposure. It was about weight, the weight of silence, of responsibility, of words left unspoken and the rooms they echo in. I did not author the messages, but I enabled the circumstances in which they became necessary. I believe the speaker at last night's reading was acting for someone else, perhaps many others. If I am remembered for anything after this term, let it be that I allowed a difficult truth to unfold, and did not reach for scissors to snip it short." C.H. Love read over his shoulder. So he didn't write them. But he knew. Probably even helped, quietly. "Yes," Purbright said. "A man who couldn't speak publicly, but chose not to interfere. He allowed the truth to arrive by another voice." "And that young woman?" "She was a messenger, not the architect. The orchestrator remains unnamed, perhaps even unknown." "Do you think we'll ever know?" Purbright folded the letter carefully. "Perhaps not. But they achieved what no inquiry ever could. They restored perspective. The town knows now. The rest is theatre that afternoon. The town square returned to life, albeit tentatively. Shop windows redressed. The vicar's cat was retrieved from the roof of the Methodist Hall. Bert Templeton was seen buying rhubarb with theatrical indifference. And Councilwoman Prowse attended a meeting on potholes with the fixed smile of a diplomat in hostile territory. Only one thing had visibly changed. On the door of the town hall, someone had affixed a brass plaque, discreet, polished, and clearly new. No council records mentioned its commissioning. It read, "Let all mortal flesh keep silence. Flaxborough, 2025. Love spotted it first. Poetic that. Purbright gave it a long glance, then turned away. Or prophetic. That evening, as twilight gathered once more around the tiled rooftops and the faint sound of a lawn-mower buzzed somewhere far off, Purbright poured himself a modest whiskey and sat at his desk. He reviewed the case file, not to reopen it, but to write the closing line. He wrote, "The truth came not with shouting, but with listening. Justice did not knock. It waited. And in waiting, it found the door ajar." He closed the file. Behind him, the station clock chimed 7. Flaxborough once again was still.